Standard Time, and this is your correspondent with War Notes, broadcasting live on this critical Wednesday. And today we bring you a comprehensive roundup of breaking news from around the globe and across our great nation, from the battlefields of East Africa to the halls of power in Washington. The world continues to spin on its axes while crisis after crisis demands our attention. We begin this morning with tragic news from the Horn of Africa. In Kenya's eastern Lamu County, near the treacherous border with Somalia, at least three Kenyan soldiers have been killed and seven wounded in a devastating roadside bomb attack. The explosion tore through their patrol vehicle as they conducted routine security operations in this volatile region that has become a breeding ground for extremist activity. The attack comes as intelligence agencies report continued efforts by ISIS and al Shabaab militants to destabilize the region. The roadside bomb, a signature weapon of these terror organizations, serve as a grim reminder that the war on terror is far from over. Kenyan defense forces have cordoned off the area and launched an immediate manhunt for the perpetrators, but the damage is done. Three more brave soldiers have paid the ultimate price for freedom. Meanwhile, in Washington, the United States has joined forces with six Gulf nations to impose fresh sanctions on three individuals accused of funding ISIS operations. This coordinated effort represents a significant escalation in the financial war against terrorism, targeting the money trails that keep these death cults operational. The sanctions freeze all assets of these terror financiers and prohibit any American or allied businesses from conducting transactions with them. While their identities remain classified for security reasons, sources close to the Treasury Department describe them as, quote, significant players, end quote, in the ISIS financial network, with tentacles reaching across multiple continents. Turning now to the Middle East, where the situation remains as volatile as ever, Israeli forces continue their campaign against Iranian nuclear facilities with recent strikes against Iranian state television infrastructure. The attacks are a part of Israel's broader strategy to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons capability, but they're also pushing the region closer to an all out war. In Gaza, the humanitarian crisis deepens by the hour. Medical facilities are warning they will become, quote, graveyards as fuel supplies dwindle to critical levels. Over 300 Palestinians have been killed while seeking aid, highlighting the impossible conditions civilians face in the war torn territory. The conflict has taken another tragic turn with the death of a 20-year-old American citizen killed by Israeli settlers while visiting family in Palestine. This incident has sparked outrage in Washington and threatens to complicate America's already delicate balancing act in the region. Now, speaking of complications here at home, America witnessed unprecedented protests on what activists are calling, quote, No King's Day, end quote. Over 5 million Americans took to the streets across the nation, including myself, demonstrating against what they perceive as authoritarian overreach. The protests, largely peaceful, of course, sent a clear message to Washington that the American people remain vigilant about their democratic rights. However, the demonstrations were marred by violence in Salt Lake City, where a fashion designer was shot and killed during the protests. The incident has sparked debates about security at public demonstrations and the rising tensions in American society. President Trump's $45 million birthday celebration and military parade drew what observers described as a disappointingly small crowd, especially considering the massive nationwide protests occurring simultaneously. The optics were troubling for an administration that prides itself on popular support. In other domestic news, the Trump administration has made a significant policy adjustment, pausing immigration raids on farms across the country. The decision comes amid growing concerns about food security and agricultural labor shortages, suggesting the administration is beginning to recognize the complex realities of immigration policy. However, they are still out there. And even with the latest news out for my listeners, they are still out there. There are ICE raid applications that you all can download. One of those are called Koke as well, COQUI, and you can download that in the App Store, Google App Store, in order to watch for ICE raids in your area. The political violence that has plagued America took another tragic turn with the assassination of Minnesota Democratic lawmaker Melissa Hortman and her husband. Police have arrested a suspect in this shocking crime that has sent shockwaves through the political establishment. The arrest brings some measure of justice, but the deeper questions about political violence in America remains unanswered. Across the Atlantic, the war in Ukraine continues to dominate headlines. President Trump has threatened Russia with heavy tariffs on countries that trade with Moscow if the Kremlin fails to reach a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. The ultimatum represents a significant escalation in economic warfare with global implications for international trade. And by the way, Putin has already said I'll report on this a little bit later, but Putin has already said he will not accept anything from the United States, and he doesn't care about our threat. Putin, meanwhile, shows no signs of backing down. Wink, wink. Intelligence reports suggest he's using diplomatic delays to strengthen military positions and deepen alliances with China and North Korea. Here's the deal. America, us as Americans here in the United States, our government are bullies. And so, unfortunately, when you bully other countries are going to say, here's the finger. I don't care what you're talking about. We don't take you serious. 1 minute is 50%. The next minute is 100%. Tomorrow it'll be 10%. And the list goes on. So even me as a United States citizen that I was born here in the United States, even I am surprised and shocked at the overreach that one yellow man can have amongst the entire country. Anyways, continuing here, the chess match between superpowers continues with Ukraine serving as the tragic battleground. In a remarkable display of international solidarity, the Gaza Freedom Flotilla ship Handala has set sail from Italy carrying an international crew hoping to break the siege on Gaza. The vessel represents humanity's determination to deliver aid to those in desperate need, despite the obvious dangers involved. President Trump has announced a 50% levy on Brazil, citing what he calls a, quote, witch hunt, end quote, against former President Bolsonaro. Now, this latest wave of tariffs demonstrates the administration's willingness to use economic weapons to influence foreign political developments. In a lighter but revealing moment, Trump praised Liberian President Boka for his English, apparently unaware that English is Liberia's official language, and he offended him. And he offended himself at the same time to show his ignorance. As we know, the incident highlights an ongoing challenges in American diplomatic relation cultural awareness, of course. The United Nations continues to grapple with global crisis, with Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I believe it is, calling for a renewed international cooperation in addressing climate change, conflict resolution, and humanitarian crisis. However, the UN's effectiveness remains hampered by great power, competition, and funding shortages. As we conclude this morning's global roundup, the world faces challenges that will test even the most experienced leaders. From the battlefields of Kenya to the diplomatic halls of Washington, from the protests in our streets to the conflicts overseas, humanity continues to struggle with the age-old problems of war, injustice, and the quest for peace. The threads connecting these stories remind us that we live in an interconnected world where events in one corner of the globe can have profound implications everywhere else. Today's news serves as a sobering reminder that the price of freedom and democracy is indeed eternal vigilance. This has been your correspondent, Pavio G, with War Notes. This is episode 162, bringing you the latest developments from around the world on this eventful July 16th, 2025. And if you guys want to know who my co-host was, that was my son in the background. He's almost 1 years old, but he's the co-anchor. We will return a little bit later on with more news from the Global Theater. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that in times like these, knowledge is our greatest weapon against chaos. From all of us here at War Notes, this is your correspondent, Pavio G, signing off. May God bless our troops, our allies, and all those fighting for freedom around the world. Have a good day, America. See you next time.